no. He must leave my house. I don't want him anymore.
Please, we need to talk this through.
He is not welcome here. Never again.
She looked at that boy and made a decision. Pack your things. You're not my problem anymore. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. Dead wrong. In America right now, thousands of stepchildren are pushed out of homes every year. Most stories fade into silence. This one didn't. Stay with me. Because by the end of this, you're going to ask yourself, how did she not see it coming? He went from the street to something nobody expected. Marcus Allen was 11 years old the first time he realized that not everyone in his house loved him the same way. It was a Tuesday. He remembers it being a Tuesday because that was the day his mother, Diane Allen, used to make spaghetti. The kind with the thick sauce and the garlic bread on the side. The kind that made the whole house smell warm, even in November. He remembers standing in the kitchen doorway and watching her hum to herself while she stirred the pot. And for one single moment, everything felt okay. Then the front door opened. And just like that, the warmth left the room. His stepmother, Sandra Pierce, walked in carrying dry cleaning and a mood that didn't belong in any home with a child in it. She dropped the plastic-wrapped clothes on the back of the sofa, looked at Marcus standing there in his socks on the kitchen tile, and said, without blinking, "Why are you always just standing around doing nothing?" Marcus was 11. He had been standing there for maybe 30 seconds. But that right there, was the temperature of his life for the next 6 years. You need to understand something before we go any further. Marcus did not grow up in a horror movie. He grew up in a house on Clover Ridge Drive in a mid-sized town in Ohio. There was a minivan in the driveway. There were soccer trophies in the hallway. From the outside, it looked like any other American home on any other American street. But the inside of that house told a completely different story. And the person sitting at the center of that story was a woman who had married Marcus's father, Raymond Pierce, when Marcus was just 8 years old, 3 years after Marcus's biological mother, Diane, passed away from a brain aneurysm at 34. Raymond Pierce was not a bad man. People who knew him will tell you that. He coached youth baseball on weekends. He paid his bills on time. He brought flowers home on Valentine's Day and remembered birthdays. But Raymond Pierce had one enormous, catastrophic blind spot, and that blind spot had a name. Sandra. He could not see what was happening inside his own home. Or maybe, and this is the part that still haunts people who followed this story, maybe he chose not to. Sandra Pierce had 2 biological children of her own, a daughter named Kylie and a son named Bryce. And if you walked into that house on Clover Ridge Drive and watched the family for 1 week, the difference in how those children were treated versus how Marcus was treated would have made your stomach turn. Kylie got a car for her 16th birthday. Marcus got a card and signed. Bryce had his college fund talked about at the dinner table like a matter of settled fact. Marcus was told, at 14, that he should start thinking about what kind of job he could get after high school. Kylie and Bryce had their school pictures framed and hung in the living room. Marcus's school pictures were kept in a drawer. A drawer. The neighbors noticed. The teachers noticed. Marcus's 7th grade English teacher, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, and she has spoken about this publicly, said that Marcus came to school some mornings looking like a child who hadn't slept. Not because he was out late, but because something in his home was costing him his rest. She tried, twice, to raise a flag. Both times, it was dismissed. Because Sandra Pierce was good at something. She was very, very good at appearances. Parent-teacher conferences? Sandra was charming. Church on Sunday? Sandra was generous. Neighborhood cookouts? Sandra brought the best potato salad and laughed the loudest. She had cultivated an image in that community so carefully, so deliberately, that when Marcus tried, twice, at school, to tell someone what life at home actually looked like, he was met with the kind of polite disbelief that is reserved for children who people have already decided are probably just seeking attention. He was 13 the first time he tried to say something. He was 15 the second time. After the second time, he stopped trying. Because nobody came. And here is the thing about a child who stops asking for help. It is not because they no longer need it. It is because they have learned, through painful experience, that asking costs them more than staying silent. Marcus went quiet. He kept his head down. He did his homework at the kitchen table while Kylie and Bryce watched television in the living room. He ate after everyone else. He learned to move through that house like a ghost. Visible enough that no one could say he wasn't there, but invisible enough that no one had to deal with him. That was the arrangement. That was the life. And Raymond? Raymond came home from work, sat at the head of the dinner table, and said things like, "This family is everything to me." And he meant it. He just never stopped to count who was actually at the table. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, Marcus was 17 years old when the thing happened that nobody in that house was prepared for. It started with a phone call. Raymond had a sister, a woman named Carol, who lived in Pennsylvania and who had always, quietly, adored Marcus. She sent him birthday cards with $20 bills inside. She called him on Christmas. She was the one person in the extended family who made Marcus feel like he was seen. And Carol, after years of watching from a distance and biting her tongue during family gatherings, finally called Raymond directly and said the words that cracked the whole surface of things open. She said, "Raymond, I need you to ask yourself, and I need you to answer honestly. When is the last time you looked at that boy and really saw him?" Raymond hung up on her, but the question stayed with him. It followed him through the next 3 days like a shadow he couldn't shake. And because guilt has a way of making people do strange things, some people become better and some people become defensive. Raymond did something that nobody predicted. He confronted Sandra, not in the gentle, searching way of a man trying to understand. In the defensive, scrambling way of a man trying to make the discomfort stop. He told Sandra what Carol had said. He asked her, loosely, vaguely, if she thought things were okay with Marcus at home. And Sandra, who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment for years, turned it around so fast and so completely that by the end of that conversation, Raymond was the one apologizing. She cried. She said she had given everything to that boy. She said she had tried, and that Marcus was cold, ungrateful, and impossible to reach. She said she felt like she was failing and that it broke her heart. She performed, in that living room, one of the most convincing acts of wounded sincerity that Raymond had ever witnessed. And Raymond believed her. He believed her so completely that the next morning, he sat Marcus down and told him, gently, with what he thought was love, that Marcus needed to try harder to connect with Sandra. That family takes effort. That Sandra really cared, but felt like Marcus kept pushing her away. Marcus sat there and listened to his father say these words and felt something inside him go very, very still. Not angry, not sad, just still. The way a room goes still right before something collapses. He nodded. He said, "Okay, Dad." He went back to his room. And 3 weeks later, on a Friday evening in March, Sandra told him to pack his things. She had found, she said, a text message on his phone, a message to a friend in which Marcus had, in the language of a frustrated teenager, called her a name. A bad name. And that was it. That was the moment she had apparently been waiting for. Because she walked into the kitchen where Raymond was making coffee, and she showed him the phone, and she said, and witnesses have confirmed these words, "I can't do this anymore. Either he goes, or I go." Raymond Pierce stood in his own kitchen, holding a coffee mug, and chose his wife. He walked to Marcus's bedroom door. He knocked. He opened it. And he said, "Son, I think it's best if you stay somewhere else for a while." Marcus was 17 years old. He packed one backpack. He walked out the front door. He stood on the sidewalk on Clover Ridge Drive and looked back at that house one time. Just once. And then he started walking. What happens to a 17-year-old boy with a backpack and nowhere to go? In Marcus's case, he walked to the one place that still felt remotely safe. His friend Derek's house, about 2 miles away. Derek was a kid Marcus had known since 5th grade, the kind of quiet, steady friend who shows up when everything else falls apart. Derek's mother, a single woman named Gloria who worked double shifts at a hospital, opened her door at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, looked at Marcus standing on her porch with that one backpack, and did not ask a lot of questions. She just said, "You hungry?" He stayed there for 6 weeks. 6 weeks on a pull-out couch in a 2-bedroom apartment that was already too small for the people living in it. Gloria never complained. She never made him feel like a burden, though he was, objectively, adding strain to a household that was already stretched thin. She packed him lunch. She made sure he got to school. She was, in every meaningful way, more of a parent to Marcus in those 6 weeks than Sandra had been in 6 years. But 6 weeks is not forever, and Marcus knew that. During those 6 weeks, something else was happening. Something that would take time to fully understand. but that was already quietly changing the shape of Marcus's future. He started writing. It began as nothing, just notes in a composition notebook he'd carried since 8th grade. He wrote about the house on Clover Ridge Drive. He wrote about the drawer where his school pictures were kept. He wrote about the Tuesday spaghetti and what it felt like when the warmth left the room. He wrote without any plan or purpose. He just wrote because it was the only way to make the pressure in his chest feel manageable. But here is the thing about truth when it is written down by someone who lived it. It has a texture that people can feel. It is not polished. It is not pretty. It does not perform. It just sits there on the page and breathes. A teacher at his high school, a man named Mr. Okafor, who taught junior English, noticed that Marcus had started coming in early to use the classroom computer. He noticed the notebook. He asked, carefully, what Marcus was working on. Marcus, who by now had very little reason to trust adults, almost said nothing. But something about Mr. Okafor, maybe it was the way he asked without pushing, the way he left the door open and then stepped back, made Marcus hand him 3 pages. Mr. Okafor read those 3 pages and sat very quietly for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus and said, "This is real writing. Do you know that?" Marcus didn't know that. Nobody had ever told him that. In the house on Clover Ridge Drive, Marcus's voice had never been something anyone was particularly interested in. But here, in a classroom that smelled like dry erase markers and old carpet, a man was telling him that what he had to say mattered. That moment, that specific, quiet, unremarkable moment in a school classroom, is the moment Marcus himself has said was the beginning of everything. Now let's talk about what happened next, because this is where the story changes shape completely. Marcus finished his senior year of high school living between Gloria's apartment and, for a brief stretch, a youth transitional housing program in the county. He graduated. He walked across that stage in a cap and gown with Gloria and Derek in the audience cheering loud enough for a whole family. Raymond Pierce was not there. Sandra Pierce was not there. Kylie was not there. Bryce was not there. But Marcus walked across that stage anyway. He had applied, on Mr. Okafor's urging, to 3 colleges. He applied for every scholarship he could find. He wrote his application essays about being displaced, about what it means to grow up in a house where you are technically present but emotionally invisible. He did not dramatize it. He did not ask for pity. He simply wrote the truth in the same plain and breathing way he had written in that composition notebook. He got into 2 schools. One offered him a partial scholarship. The other, a mid-sized state university in the Midwest, offered him a full ride based on financial need and academic merit. He chose the full ride. He packed the same backpack. He added a duffel bag this time. Gloria drove him to campus. She cried at the drop-off. He did not cry until she drove away. And then he stood in the parking lot of his dormitory and let himself feel the full weight of how far he had come from that sidewalk on Clover Ridge Drive. College changed Marcus Allen in the way that only genuine intellectual freedom can change a person who has never had it before. He studied communications. He took creative writing electives. He joined the campus newspaper. He interviewed people. He told stories. And the more stories he told, the more people kept saying the same thing to him. "You have a way of making me feel like I was there." By his junior year, Marcus had a blog. Not a polished, monetized, search engine optimized blog. Just a corner of the internet where he posted his writing. Long pieces, personal pieces, pieces about family, about belonging, about what it means to be chosen and what it means to be left. He posted without much expectation. And then, quietly at first, and then all at once, people started reading. Not dozens of people, not hundreds, thousands of people, and then tens of thousands. People who had been in foster care, people who had been displaced by divorce or remarriage. People who had grown up in houses where they were physically present but emotionally absent. People who had never had the words for their experience, and who found, in Marcus's writing, a language that fit. The comments were extraordinary. Grown adults writing paragraphs about how a blog post had made them feel understood for the first time. Single parents sharing his work and tagging their children. Teachers printing his essays and bringing them into classrooms. A grief counselor in Texas who said she had started recommending his writing to clients. Marcus Allen, the boy who had been told to pack his things, the boy whose school pictures were kept in a drawer, had somehow, through the specific gravity of his own story, found an audience of people who needed to hear exactly what he had lived. And now we arrive at the part of this story that people find hardest to sit with. Because around the time Marcus's writing was gaining real traction, around the time his name was starting to appear in places that people actually pay attention to, something happened back on Clover Ridge Drive. Raymond Pierce got sick. It was his heart. A series of complications that had gone undetected and then, as these things do, became suddenly and seriously impossible to ignore. He was hospitalized twice in 1 year. The second hospitalization was severe enough that the doctors had real conversations with Sandra about what the next stages might look like. And it was during this period, this frightening, destabilizing period, that Kylie, who had by now graduated college and was living in Charlotte, reached out to Marcus. She found his email through his blog. She wrote him a message that was short and uncomfortable and honest in the way that only something written under pressure can be. She said that their father was not doing well. She said she thought Marcus should know. She said, and this is the part Marcus has spoken about publicly, I know things weren't right when we were growing up. I didn't say anything then. I should have. Marcus read that email 3 times. He did not respond for 2 weeks. Then he wrote back. He did not write back with anger, though he had every right to. He did not write back with bitterness or a list of grievances or a demand for accountability. He wrote back with the same plain and breathing honesty that had always been his signature. He said he appreciated Kylie reaching out. He said he had processed a lot over the years. He said he was not ready to see Raymond, but that he was glad to know. He asked about Bryce. He asked how Kylie was doing. And then, at the bottom of the email, he wrote a single line that Kylie has shared publicly with his permission. He wrote, I don't think your mother is a monster. I think she was a woman who wanted a specific life, and I was the part of it that didn't fit. That's a painful thing to carry, being the part that didn't fit. But I'm not carrying it anymore. I want you to think about that for a moment. A young man who was put out of his home at 17, who slept on a pull-out couch, who walked across a graduation stage with no family in the audience, choosing not forgiveness as a gift to Sandra, but release as a gift to himself. That is not something small. That is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Raymond Pierce, through Kylie, eventually sent Marcus a letter. Handwritten. 3 pages. Marcus has never shared the contents of that letter publicly, and in every interview he has given, he has declined to discuss the specifics. What he has said is this: it was the first time my father saw me. I wish it hadn't taken so long, but I'm glad it happened. Whether Raymond and Marcus fully reconciled before Raymond's health declined further is something Marcus has kept private, and that privacy is his right. What we know is that the relationship did not end the way it began, with silence and a closed door. Something passed between that father and that son. Something quiet and real and too late and still, somehow, worth something. Marcus Allen is in his early 30s now. He lives in a city he has chosen for himself, in an apartment he has filled with books and plants and the kind of deliberate, considered comfort that belongs entirely to a person who once had nothing but a backpack. He has a partner. He has a dog named Chester. He has a life that is, by every visible measure, good. But more than the personal details, more than the apartment and the partner and the dog, what Marcus has built is something that cannot be taken from him. He is a writer and advocate whose work on family displacement, childhood emotional neglect, and the invisible wounds of non-biological family dynamics has reached an audience that grows every year. He has spoken at universities. He has testified, voluntarily and without compensation, before a state legislative committee examining the legal protections, or rather, the alarming absence of legal protections, for stepchildren and non-biological dependents who are displaced from family homes. He worked alongside social workers and child welfare advocates to help draft a public awareness campaign that has since been adopted in multiple counties in Ohio. The kid from the pull-out couch. The kid from the drawer. He did that. And Sandra Pierce? Sandra still lives in Ohio. She has never publicly addressed Marcus's story, though his writing has been widely read in the same community where Clover Ridge Drive exists. Several people who knew the family have spoken, over the years, in various forums and comment sections and community conversations. The portrait they paint is complicated, as most portraits of real people are. Sandra was not a cartoon villain. She was a woman with her own wounds, her own fears, her own definition of family, one that never included a boy she hadn't chosen. That does not make what she did acceptable. Let's be clear about that. Removing a 17-year-old child from a home, a child in your legal care, is not a parenting choice. It is an abandonment. And in the years since Marcus's story became known, at least 2 people have come forward in that community to say they witnessed things in that household that troubled them at the time and that they wish they had acted on. That is the part of this story that sits with you longest. Not Sandra, not even Raymond, but the neighbors, the teachers, the community members who saw something off and said nothing. Because we tell ourselves that it is not our place. We tell ourselves that family is complicated, that we don't know the full story, that surely the parents know best. But Marcus Allen was a child on a sidewalk with a backpack. And the full story, it turns out, was right there the whole time. Visible, breathing, waiting for someone to see it. There is a question that comes up every time someone tells this story, and it is always some version of the same question. What made Marcus different? What made him survive what so many others don't? And Marcus himself has answered this in an essay he wrote a few years ago that has since been shared hundreds of thousands of times. He said, and I want to get this right, because the words matter. It wasn't strength. People want it to be strength because strength is inspiring. But it wasn't that. It was one couch. One woman named Gloria who opened a door. One teacher named Mr. Okafor who read 3 pages and told me the truth. One friend named Derek who let me sleep in his living room without making me feel like I owed him anything. I didn't survive because I was stronger than the situation. I survived because 3 people treated me like I was worth something when nothing around me confirmed that I was. 3 people. That is all it took. 3 ordinary people making ordinary, unspectacular choices. To open a door, to read a page, to share a couch. 3 people who did not save Marcus Allen. They just refused to ignore him. And sometimes, in the life of a child who has been told, explicitly or implicitly, that they are not worth the trouble, being refused to be ignored is the same thing as being saved. In America right now, there are children sleeping on pull-out couches. There are children going to school with the particular quietness of someone who has learned that asking for help is dangerous. There are children whose school pictures are in a drawer. This story ended the way it did because 3 people showed up. The only question that matters when you walk away from this is whether you are the kind of person who shows up. Marcus Allen thinks you are. And honestly, so do we.